Okay. Figure drawing for animation. When I first started teaching in the training program at Walt Disney Studios, it never occurred to me that there would have to be a special kind of drawing approach for the animator. The thing that amazed me was that for animators, basically these are people who are gone to art school, or some haven't, but they're trained artists, professionals working in the field. And there was this fantastic difference between what they did, for 8 hours a day, to the kind of thinking that they brought to when they started working from the model. There was it was like night and day. It's like there was no relationship from one to the other. Now, the purpose of the training programs was to take and bring the understanding of anatomy, of movement, of structure, form, to the animators, because people don't realize this when they try to get into animation, or trying to get into the business, that the knowledge of the human form is the basic knowledge that everybody requires. In fact, looking at portfolios, when people are applying, what people are looking for are life drawings, not cartoon drawings. They always think that, I always see these again and again, and I get a chance to look at every now and then of the portfolios that come in, and people will have drawings of Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or something like that, and those aren't the things that really people want to see. What they want to see is how well they take and treat the figure, how well they understand form. It's the basis of everything, and particularly in their ability to take and capture movement, the flow. The drawing has to have a sense of life to it. Now, the need of the animator take and determine the kind of drawing that they have to do, or what they're trying to achieve when they're taking and drawing from life. And this is where I was surprised that there was this great difference. Because in animation, what we're trying to achieve is a certain sense of volume. Now, I'm talking about Disney animation primarily. I'm talking really about the classic craft. The thing that we have to be able to communicate is this believability of volume, of movement. The characters that we draw have to be alive. We have to be able to look at those characters and see that they're thinking. There's some kind of a thought process going on in their minds. Now, what we do in the animation drawing, and that never seemed to get across into the studying from the life, was that let me give you an example of a kind of structure. Now, this is the kind of thing that if you're at all interested in animation, you've seen. It's like when you look at, there's a lot of paperback books out on it. You find there's all kinds of books that even Disney has put out that what we call a model sheet, where they take a character and it's built up. They take and, the figure is so many heads high. Now, I'm not drawing Disney characters here, but you can see essentially it's built up of simple spheres. They'll take and use ellipses. Now, it could be anything. Now, we can make this into, it could be a snowman, or it could be a dog. We could do all kinds of stuff. The kind of a way that the character, see if we had a character running, building this sort of almost amorphic type of form. Okay, Now, like I said, what amazed me was that artists who were taking and doing this day in and day out weren't able to take and bring the same thinking over into taking and drawing from the model. And part of it happens to be, I think, in the way drawing education has been for the last 25, 30, 35 years, where the primary concern has been more of an emotional approach to drawing, and also where drawing was what we refer to as sort of as more of an illustration approach, where the concern was more for taking and copying sort of outside shapes of things, where we would take and it was literally sort of copying the model, so it is a two-dimensional type of thing. And just trying to see how well somebody could reproduce something. Well, the demands of animation are that what we have to do is we have to look at the model and analyze what the action is doing so that we can draw that figure from any point of view, so that that particular angle that we're looking at is not necessarily the most important thing. That we would want to be able to take and like what we do every day working is to take and draw from our heads, draw from your imagination, draw figures from any angle doing anything that we want them to do. You have to be able to construct, to organize your drawing in a way that you can make, like taking drawing something like this, so that if I said, well, this guy, say, is running here, maybe I would want to see it from a different angle. Maybe the art director, or the director would say, well, I don't like that angle. Maybe he should be coming more from a straight out in front view. Maybe we want to have to start taking and doing something like this. Maybe the guy's got to be, coming at us. Okay, we have to have the ability to take and visually construct and turn and work this thing around. Okay, so let's take and start going through the figure a little bit. And what I want to try to do is to give you a way of looking at the figure and a way of approaching it that would be useful for taking and doing animation. Okay. Now, the first thing you do, we're talking about working from a live model, and it's a little difficult to take and do this in a way because what it is, it's a very abstract thinking. You're not copying, and sometimes it's more difficult if you've already been trained, because you've got a method of working and a method of thinking that it's become habit. You have to take and have this mental flexibility to take and change the way you think, the way you look. Okay. Now, the foremost and primary thing that we're after in looking at the figure for animation purposes is the action and the gesture. Now, we use a term that we call line of action. Well, normally in any life drawing class, we would take and we know this just as getting the gesture. But the line of action could be, what you try to do is you try to find a most simple movement going through a figure. Most basic thing. Something that takes and ties the whole thing together. So this is the first thing that we look at. Now, there's no formulas per se. You'll find every animator takes and works differently. Some will take and work like this. Some take and will be very, very scribbly type thing. But it's still essentially, you can feel that movement, whatever it happens to be, through the whole thing. And there's a concentration on getting that action. Another thing that most people don't realize is that animation drawing is not done, you don't do one drawing and then do another. The process is a build-up process where we take and you take the first preliminary drawings may be just analyses of poses, quick little action things, like what I'm doing here, just scribbles trying to take and feel out. Then it will take and working on a light board, add another drawing, and then go over it again and again, and slowly start to take and develop these things, having posed it out in several stages. Now, this action is you try to find sort of extremes of action. You look at the model and you try to translate this into sort of what is the ultimate of that pose. So just taking and starting something like this, now maybe this doesn't quite do it. Now this is a very simple type of thing, but maybe we would want to take and show maybe a little bit more. Maybe the leg would even be lifting high. We try to force it. Now I'm taking and dealing with a, right here, just a profile type thing. And in fact, like most Saturday morning stuff you see, primarily profiles, moving mouths. Well, in fact, what the directors ask me and what I do is we try to avoid a lot of times just simple profiles. We try to take and deal more with the qualities that take and actually show the three dimensions, show the volume, show movement coming toward us. So you have to start in your drawing then thinking in the round. We try to feel movement in space. So you try to sense this. Now all of this demands, and I'll keep repeating this, is it demands the ability to take and see in 3-dimension. Now, not to take and play down the fact that, of course, animation is sort of pantomime, where you take and you try to communicate with a gesture, a pose, a movement, more than with taking and using words. It's a visual form, so that the silhouette becomes very, very, very important. In fact, we try to open forms up. We try to take and, like what I'm doing here, is to try to give opening so you can feel what that movement is. Okay. Now, having said that, the gesture then is really, that is the most important thing, and the drawing should never lose that quality. It always has to maintain that ability to feel like it's alive. That's what you're looking at. That's what you're looking for. Now, as I started out showing that that first breakdown, the first sort of approach to animation that everybody is pretty much familiar with, is the idea of using this ball or this sphere. Taking and say, this becomes the basis for sort of everything. Every character, whether it's a horse, a monkey, a squirrel, a dog, this becomes the simple basics. Then we start to take and add things on to that. Okay. Now, it becomes a series of spheres. Now, in fact, the first basic exercise of an animator is, and I'm sure, again, one of those things that everybody sees, but taking this ball and animating a bouncing ball and making that thing go through. That is really the first exercise of making this thing move, making you take and sense a squash, what have you. Also, in taking and working with such a formalized approach to the figure, since animation is not a sole effort, one doesn't do this by oneself. We take and we've got 100 or so people taking and working on these drawings, that everyone has to take and draw the character the same way. Everyone has to be able to take and pick up somebody else's drawing and work on it, correct it. So we have to have a formula, a systemized way of thinking and working altogether. So it's a team effort. So in doing this was developed this, what we call our model sheets, where we take and actually formula is we say, well, the figure is, 3 heads high or 5 heads high. The human figure in animation is normally about 5 heads high. Okay, now let's start breaking this down. Now, the first thing we try to do is to see the basic overall structure of the figure. Now, the head, as we've been talking here, is usually just a simple sphere. Now, we're taking and dealing with the fairly realistic human form. The neck is a cylinder, and the torso is a combination of a couple things. One, well, let's start with first the overall shape, and then we'll take and break this down a little bit. And the first thing is sort of we sort of jokingly call this is the basic beanism. In other words, the basic bean shape that takes and becomes all kinds of different things. You could it can become a dog. You could become a human standing up, what have you. But it's all based on reality, and this is the part that is the really important, where the study of anatomy, where the study of the actual form is really so important. It's reality. We're always trying to communicate reality. So this really is the first basic thinking about it, is we try to think that we have two simple spheres, one taking and building and fitting on top of the other. Okay, this taken represents the rib cage. This takes and represents the pelvis. And we try to then use these forms as the basic building blocks of what we're doing. For instance, if I was drawing a horse, I would be taking and starting out with same thing, thinking of the rib cage of the horse and the pelvic area of the horse. Then we would be taking and building on top of that. And the legs, and actually we're taking and analyzing how these things one builds, how does a horse run, how does a horse walk, what have you. The same thing that we do with the human. So we take and see these simple basic forms. Now, as you're going from one character to another, we take and say modify these forms. You would have the size of the head. These are all tools that we take and use. So the rib cage could be smaller. Say if we had a rather heavy bottom person, we would just take, this would be smaller. We would take and start to take and develop something bigger here. Now notice what I'm doing. I'm continually, as I'm doing this, I'm always being conscious of the fact that this is a round, three-dimensional form. This is the main point that we're after. Okay. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking and going through here and putting an emphasis on how the animation, the figurative animation drawing is done, and then we'll take and start doing some drawings that are more from the model type. Okay. Now, the approaching from the basic forms that we have here, the arms, the legs, the hands, the feet, are all done the same way. They're basically simple forms. We think of simple volumes, simple cylinders. It's like drawing mannequins in a way, except that the mannequin has to have a certain spontaneity and sense of life to it. But in analyzing it and breaking it down, we have to have these control forms. We have to have these fundamental forms that we can take and say, now, again, maybe this leg would have to be moved over, or maybe it would have to be moved up. And the ability to take and look at the drawing and say, well, in the next drawing, this person is going to be taking and moving over, to take and move this sphere, to take and sense how this action is going to take and pull one to the next. Okay, now I'm going to start with the head and work my way through the figure very, very quickly and try to break it down into simple forms that you should be using when you're taking and looking from the model. Okay. Now, starting with the head, first of all, the head is a simple oval. Okay. Now, the hard part, it's simple, but it has to be there's a certain precision to it, and there's a certain exactness in the drawing. Because you have to think about the head, and when we look at the model, we try to feel the skull. We try to sense the fact that there's volume and mass in there. Now, the most important element is the location of the eyes. The fact that in reality, they're in the center. Now, what we do is we take and very carefully try to concentrate on what the actual angle of those eyes are on. Where we take and what the tilt of the head is. So we're taking and blocking in. So when you're working from the model, then this becomes the same basic model. And in reality, this is animation drawing is the closest thing that we have to what is thought of as classical drawing. And that if we took the preliminary drawings of, say, Raphael and even Michelangelo, you would find that this is essentially the basic lay-in that they used. Okay, so the first thing is we take, and this becomes then that oval. Now, we think about the axis, the vertical axis, horizontal axis, and the fact if there's any tilt. Okay. The next element is to take and start to analyze the relationship of the head to the shoulders. Now, first, the neck takes and is essentially just a cylinder. And it takes and tilts forward. The head is out. So, but the important thing is to see this as a round form. Okay. Now, that neck fits into the rib cage. And the first concern then is to see that rib cage and that basic bean shape that I took and drew before, but to see how that fits in and to draw transparently. To see this as a basic volume. Okay. Now, here I've drawn this without shoulders. Usually what we do is that we take and combine. You try to see this, but then we take and that basic shape of the top so that we really almost start to see this more as a box type of form. Very simple, very clear and to the point. Now, okay, now this is a simple front view here. Now, what you find now is that we take and you have to look at the model and start to see the differences that start taking place. How, for instance, on a female, that neck appears to be longer and narrower, and we start to see more of a sloping quality. The fact that the rib cage appears smaller because of the angle of the thoracic arch, but we see this basic, simple form. To start looking at the shape, what starts to communicate. So we take and start to exaggerate. We try to see what those basic qualities are. Okay. Now, the danger, or one of the things that we find is a problem in taking and drawing the figure like this, is that there's almost an oversimplification. You have to take and work at really looking at reality. You have to see it. So that I may be drawing this thing. Now I'm drawing this as a simple three-dimensional form here. But what happens, it's so easy to come in, and this is because of the tradition of training that we have to deal with right now, is that most people look at a model and they come in and they see this and then they start to draw something like this, instead of drawing that simple form, one fitting into the other, so that we can take and build with that form. Now, the head and rib cage, there's a certain flow to it. The head, naturally, when we stand, nobody stands perfectly rigid. Nobody stands like this unless it happens to be a palace guard or something like that, and then it becomes a caricature for that certain gesture. Most people are standing sort of relaxed, slouched. The head tends to come forward. We feel this sort of leaning that takes place. And so there's a flow and there's a rhythm that takes place. The rib cage now takes and tilts forward. Okay? And the pelvis then would tend to tilt like this. Now, so we try to see this movement and start. Now, quite often it's like we don't draw too many nudes in our animated films. Usually they have clothes on. So we try to take and communicate this basic shape and this basic feeling through the drapery. So say we have a character standing here, and you sort of get this gesture, we got this feeling that's going on here, and we try to analyze the pose. And you're continually analyzing. You try to see, okay, here, try to feel try to feel pull coming out here. And I would use, for instance, say a belt to take and start to show the fact that it's round, that there's a certain tilt or gesture to that. It could be, make it a tunic. We would take and feel, we could even have this sort of sticking out. It sort of helps that action. Okay, trying to sense, okay, this, but it's that building underneath, using seams in a shirt, a collar that would take and go around to help show that volume. Okay, these are all basic things. It doesn't take very much to make something have volume, to take and look round. Okay, and the thing here, that the line itself is taking in, when I'm drawing, analyzing, when I'm doing this and going around the neck to show that it's a cylinder, well, we do exactly the same thing when we're doing a finished drawing. We don't necessarily draw the line all the way through because we can't see it, but we move our hand that way and we take and work on the corners of forms as they take and go around. Now, now let's go into that torso a little bit more. Now today, in the animated business, you see a lot of He-Man type characters. And everybody seems to be drawing these sort of big, muscle-bound characters, all these heroes. Okay. The same thing, you have to take and develop systems. It's basically building forms upon form. We sense first, you try to, so that you can turn. In other words, we want to be able to take and turn this character in any angle. So we try to see these simple volumes, these simple masses. And from any angle. So we take and we start to build on top of these forms. And again, it's based on reality observation. Okay. First, think of the structure. You have to know how a rib cage is built and start to understand the basic cliches, how to sense of how the volume is pulling in here. You feel where the bottom of the sternum is, where the corners. I mean, there's a certain landmarks that we take and think. Like, for instance, when you're looking at the front of the figure, you have the pit of the neck, bottom of the sternum, the sort of the thoracic arch, the navel, corners of the pelvis. Okay, these are landmarks. Whether I'm taking and dealing with the front view, three-quarter view, these aid me in taking and turning a form, seeing where things are at. Getting the perspective, seeing the foreshortening. Okay. Now, the larger masses that we start to build on, then we see the pectoralis muscles. First, a simple mass that's built on top. A simple formula. Let's just make the arm simple coming down here so we can deal with those simple shapes. Volume. Okay. We take in the clavicles. Building. Now these are all cliches. They're all formulas. We feel the trapezius muscles in the back. Now, we would start to pick up, even start, say an arm is out. We'd have latissimus dorsi. We'd take and start dealing with deltoid muscles. But to help in these things, you have to take and try to understand what the mass of these forms are. Going back to looking at anatomy structures like Bridgman, who taught the art students at the turn of the century, really took and developed complete systems. And actually, if we go back and we look at, say, Roman sculpture, the formulas that were taken and developed at those times. Now, what I'm doing here, this is just a very, very flat view. Again, we have to be able to see these things as three-dimensional forms. We have to be able to look at this and say that this is a mass that takes and comes through. I want to feel those muscles as being big, solid blocks. We're taking a look at the stomach muscles as being volumes that take and stick out, build from these forms. Okay. That we would try to analyze sometimes the forms as boxes. And in fact, now I've been taking and primarily drawing simple spheres. Well, a lot of the animators, through their training, what have you, have developed doing the same exact thing but using boxes, which is perfect. There's no rules. It's just you find that different people have different ways of doing it. Now, the box has a certain advantage in it, in that it has real corners, really definite side, the front, the side, top, bottom, so that when you're drawing a box, we can take and turn that. We can take and make this, lean over more. We can go back and space more. We can do anything we want with that box. Of course, the prerequisite being that you have to be able to draw a box, which may sound sort of fallacious, but I'd be amazed at how many people can't draw boxes that are taking and moving in space, and this becomes a prerequisite for that. So to analyze the form. Now let me take and do some drawings as if I was taking and working from a model and try to break down a little bit. Now, okay. First, again repeating, I'm doing a lot of repetitions here, is to take and first you try to feel the gesture. Whatever that happens to be. And the thing is that we try to stay away from the static type thing. Okay, first you take, and this is as if I'm drawing exactly the way I would be drawing as if I was drawing from a model. So that you're analyzing. You're trying to see how things fit one form into the other. And this is exactly what I teach when I'm taking and teaching in the training program at Disney. Simple masses, feeling, angle, checking Forms are going. Seeing. Now, one thing I do that I'm not doing right now is that most of the poses to start with, when we have the classes and the sketch groups, are 1 minute, 2 minute, and 5 minute poses. So the emphasis is on gesture and movement. See me taking in, see, so far there's nothing anatomical here. It's all built up on the idea of simple forms. No anatomy. But the anatomy, the knowledge of anatomy, starts to allows you through years and years of analyzing to take and get a sense of how the form moves and fits and what have you. Now, you try to work for clarity. Like I'm trying to see how does this neck fit into that head. Okay. Think of the rib cage as simple form underneath. The way the shoulder pulls, how that fits in. Notice also that I'm primarily concentrating on line. I'm not taking and dealing with tone. Because animation, again, is a linear form, art form, rather than a tonal one. The tone is done at a different stage of the production. Okay. Concerned about how and how this takes and comes in, starts fitting into the pelvis or the waist here. In other words, avoiding ambiguity. Okay. Taking and now the thing that is sort of misleading a little bit, not misleading, but well, maybe misleading, is that what I'm doing up here looks easy. I mean, it really, this, as I'm doing this drawing, I'm sure you can say, well, that looks really simple. What's so difficult about that? Well, you find that it's not that easy. The taking and looking at a model and reducing it down to these simple forms becomes difficult. It's primarily because it's such an abstraction. It's not what you see. It's not the shapes, the lines, and the tones that you're actually looking at. Now let me take, and I don't want to spend too much time here, I want to take and go through the figure a little bit more. Particularly say, go through the legs and do a little bit with the arms here. Now, when we take and approach drawing the legs, what we try to do, and again being very repetitious here, but trying to make the point here, is that you first, whatever that gesture is, you try to feel, you feel the movement, you feel the flow. Okay. Then we try to establish very clearly what the direction of that form is, so that we have a very distinct idea of where the placement of this is in relationship to that, where we're going. What ways are these forms taking and going? Okay. Then, some of these things are done simultaneously. Like what I'm doing here now is I'm saying, okay, this is the direction of a form. Then the next thing is I'm saying, okay, the volume. Now, quite often we do the same thing all at one time, but you also try to show very clearly what forms now are overlapping, where the corner of the form is, where the end of this knee would be. Now remember, I'm talking about drawing from the model for the purpose of studying, for animation purposes. Okay? So that you're continually trying to analyze and try to see what is the shape of a leg. So you start out in doing this, you start out with primarily sort of straight lines. After you've gone through and felt the movement, then we try to analyze and break it down. There's one whole school of drawing for animation that emphasizes the primary basic design element of straight against curve. Now, which becomes a very, and this is basing on the fact that we're working on a two-dimensional surface. It's a flat piece of paper, and we are designing these shapes. They have to be interesting, they have to be artful, but they also have to take and communicate what a certain gesture is, so that you can see. Now, we would take this basic leg, something like this, and you have to be able to look at it and say, well, now maybe this is, I'm drawing here, well, fairly muscular. It's probably a female leg because of sort of heavy in the thigh here. My wife would probably kick me a little bit there. But you have to take and look at, analyze types, and this is really becomes one of those basic elements. But the saying, well, maybe this is a skinny leg. We have that same, we came down and we start to, look, you have to have that control to be able to take and modify these shapes and to look at the character that you're working with. Now, what I'm doing here, and which becomes a very critical point, is how one form takes and overlaps the other. So that when you're drawing from the model, you have to look at connections. And we, besides this simplification, you have to look at what is coming in front and what is the basic drawing element that shows that one thing is going back, one thing is coming forward. This idea of where the corners or forms are. Now, as we come into the foot, the same thing applies. We try to take and show how that connecting is done. Now, the foot is a particularly sort of vexing problem. First of all, it's sort of a complex thing, and when it comes to doing animation, you try to use as few lines as you possibly can. You don't want to draw 300 lines, because every time you do a drawing, you're going to have to take and repeat those hundreds and hundreds of lines. So we don't want to do that. So let's take a sort of a first sort of a realistic type of foot. This is a foot, it's coming out here, and got all the stuff going on. You got toes, Okay. Start basic sort of formula, quick Renaissance type foot. Okay. Now what we do is to take and working with that reality, we try to see, okay, now that leg is coming down, maybe just a subtle little pull. Maybe a subtle little thing, emphasizing the fact that the ankle's low on the outside and high on the inside. And then seeing that we have a line that's coming in. But to look at the shape and to see this as a simple shape. The fact that the inside of the leg is basically straight, the outside is a little curved, and the fact that the big toe comes out. And usually we start out, we draw the foot as if it had a sock on. So what you're looking at a shape thing. So then in profile, we start to see a very, very simple sort of a triangle, the most rudimentary type of form. Now that can get modified into all kinds of things. We start building up and start adding forms to it. Okay, so then maybe it's a little bit more, but it's a very, very simplified form based on reality. Simple gesture, quick action. Okay. Circle. Now this is normal type of thing that you see in a life drawing class. Usually female. Most instructors are male. Okay. Okay. Again, notice that I'm taking and dealing simple round forms. Get my gesture going. Cylinders. Okay. Now, again, I'll come down to these formulas, like dealing with the feet and the legs. Like my first concern now here is to, if you can see it, I'm drawing is basic, just cylinders, very non-anatomical. Okay. Concentrate on the connection. A simple line, follow one thing. Now, here, being aware of the fact that the calf of the leg, now when you look at the anatomy of the leg, you find that you've got these muscles that are coming down, that are fitting in, coming down, and tying into the heel. Okay. Now, we don't draw it this way usually. We try to take and draw a much more simple form unless it happens to be within the character. But when you're looking at the model, we try to see, okay, what is that basic shape? What is the basic volume taking and doing to feel that mass? And again, reducing these things down to, in a sense, really basic cylinders. One cylinder, a sphere fitting into a cylinder. Try to see, and coming down, to see the volumes, the foot, seeing the plane of the underside of the foot. Okay. Notice what I've done here, basically just simply drawing the buttocks here. Again, this is just a sphere. Now, one of the things I haven't mentioned yet is that we really try to take and to give believability to animation drawings, that we have to be very, very conscious of gravity, of the weight of the figure, of what happens with pressure, tension, when something's being pushed, pulled. So, like for instance, in this pose, I would probably take and make a point. Okay, this part is dropping, this leg is lifted. The pressure, the weight is going up on this, so we really feel the pressure, the tension pushing in here, and start to really make us feel that buttock sticking out, feel that stress that's going on, this hip lifting up, to dramatize the point. Okay. To say, okay, that rib cage is really pulling out. Simple form. Okay. Now, let's take the, well, I've got this figure going here. Let's take and start dealing with the back a little bit. And this is really the way I'd take and teach my regular life drawing class too, is that seeing this simple form, seeing the simple mass of the rib cage, then we build upon that. For instance, we see the mass of the scapula. See this form building up on top. It's building here. And these volumes. Arms coming out. Same as we take and approach the legs. They are simple cylinders, and we become concerned primarily about where the connections are. Okay. In this case, since I'm drawing a female, the muscles of the upper arm are not played up. They're very, very simple. Now, the elbow is a sometimes tricky area to deal with. What you have, if you notice my arm here, that you've got three bones, three points. You have the end of a condyle here, and then the lower part of the arm here. These create a triangle in here. So what we do is we use that triangle as a means to take and help us show direction by taking and feeling the corner. And you can characterize that. In other words, we can feel this stuff, something like this. So we can feel that real direction taking and coming out. So just blocking this very simply, try to see where those simple points are. And then the lower arm, again, just a cylinder going in. Pulling back. Now, anatomically, what we want to try to do is let's look at the front of this a little bit here. The arm, essentially what we have is the large pectoralis muscles you have your biceps, but you try to see this as simple masses. You try to see them as simple forms. Take, starting from the top where the clavicle and the scapula come together, we have the deltoid takes in as a simple big mass and actually attaches halfway down on the bone. The bone would be coming down here. And again, you look for formulas. Now, for instance, like on the inside of the arm, I'm not too bony here, but you can start to see, unfortunately, you can see there's a slight protrusion in here. This condyle comes in. You try to see first a simple shape coming through here. You see the deltoid, and to see it as mass taking and coming over a surface. Okay. Now, here, let's just take in characters. Let's look at this as a form coming across, and this taking and coming down this way. So you can feel like there's a top and a side to this. Now, from here, the bicep area, and we also have the pectorals coming in from the side here. Okay, tucking underneath, the bicep going underneath here. But in analyzing it, seeing it as mass, we try to see that this is a simple shape that is doing this. To see this volume that's being created. This is short on top, long on the side, long on the top, short on the side. Okay. Now, so what we got is this. Try to feel those volumes. Bicep, feel a little bit of the tricep and back. And then the muscles of the arm take and fit into this. It's the next connection so that we have the top is flat, and then this is turn the other way. So that we try to feel, as you're looking at this now, in sort of a crude drawing here. Put this guy over where he belongs. But you can see from this, and now we feel that fitting in here. So we can start to see this. Okay, now, this is a fairly academic, muscular type of arm. Though this information, though, can into the most simplest type of thing. Say you're drawing a small, wispy type of arm. You would be doing the same thing. You would take and you're first thinking of the gesture. You would come down, and it would just be a question of coming in and feeling that overlapping, that little bit of form coming through. Coming in. Okay, now the next thing that comes up, of course, is the hand. Now, there's two approaches. So one is the famous cartoon hand. In other words, the cartoon hand is the one where there's only 3 fingers. All of the Donald Ducks, it's this type of just a very, very simple little thing. Okay, the same thing now applies when you're taking and drawing from the model. What we try to do is to first analyze. You look at that arm and hand is all together. First we take and we try to see the connection, like what I'm doing here. I was just taking and I just drew this sort of a cylinder out here and there's a little wispy arm. Well, what we do is we try to see the wrist area as a box, a square. Now, what I'm doing today is giving you sort of a logic or a view of taking and approaching the model. Now, in 1 hour's time, it becomes sort of impossible to take and do what I normally spend 15, 16 weeks doing, and going through the whole figure and breaking it down. But the idea is that if you have a rationale, a logic that you can take and approach the figure with, that you can get away from this simple copying process that we take and most people deal with the model. Now, like what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of automatically taking and breaking the figure. Notice what I've done. Okay, I've started out the wrist here. I'm taking and I'm using the box idea. Wrist. I'm taking the figure, the hand here, and I'm drawing the fingers as sections of boxes. I guess you'd give it the whole full. So we take and we try to see these masses. Okay. Figure drawing for animation. When I first started teaching in the training program at Walt Disney Studios, it never occurred to me that there would have to be a special kind of drawing approach for the animator. The thing that amazed me was that for animators, basically these are people who are gone to art school, or some haven't, but they're trained artists, professionals working in the field. And there was this fantastic difference between what they did, for 8 hours a day, to the kind of thinking that they brought to when they started working from the model. There was it was like night and day. It's like there was no relationship from one to the other. Now, the purpose of the training programs was to take and bring the understanding of anatomy, of movement, of structure, form, to the animators, because people don't realize this when they try to get into animation or trying to get into the business, that the knowledge of the human form is the basic knowledge that everybody requires. In fact, looking at portfolios, when people are applying, what people are looking for are life drawings, not cartoon drawings. They always think that I always see these again and again, and I get a chance to look at every now and then of the portfolios that come in, and people will have drawings of Donald Duck or Mickey Mouse or something like that, and those aren't the things that really people want to see. What they want to see